Welcome to Bedtime, Sleepy Historian, where history isn't rushed, it drifts. Here, we wander through forgotten corners of the past, ancient punishments, royal secrets, ghostly palaces, and everyday lives that time almost erased. Each story is told slowly, softly, and with a touch of dry humor, designed to ease your mind and carry you gently towards sleep. So settle in, let the flicker of history's lantern guide you, and allow the whispers of the past to become tonight's lullaby. The whisper of truth and the weight of lies. The city of Babylon rose out of the desert like a mirage made permanent. Its walls shimmered with glazed bricks the color of lapis, its gates heavy with bronze, and its streets alive with the scents of roasting meat, incense, and clay dust carried on the wind. At dusk, when the torches were lit and the chatter of merchants quieted, the city revealed itself as a stage upon which both splendor and absurdity played their parts. Among the Babylonians, lying was not merely a flaw of character, it was a disturbance in the order of the cosmos. To twist the truth was to insult Shamash, the sun god, the very deity who watched all human dealings by day. A lie was a shadow cast against divine light, and shadows, as the people believed, could not go unpunished. But Babylonian punishments were never dull, never ordinary. The ancients, with their mixture of legal brilliance and theatrical imagination, devised methods of discouraging falsehood that blended ritual, humiliation, and sometimes a dark humor that lingers even now across millennia. One such punishment involved the river itself. The Euphrates was both lifeline and judge, flowing majestically through the city, dividing truth from deceit with its unyielding currents. A person accused of lying could be brought to the banks, surrounded by priests, witnesses, and curious onlookers who were eager for entertainment as much as justice. The accused would be thrown into the water, their fate resting not on their swimming ability, but on whether the gods allowed them to survive. If they floated and reached the far bank, Shamash had vindicated them. If they sank beneath the brown surface, bubbles rising in frantic protest, then their guilt was considered proven, though by that point, no one lingered to hear them confess. Yet not every liar was sent to the river. Some faced punishments that were tailored to the nature of their untruths. A merchant caught in a small lie about the weight of barley might find himself forced to parade naked through the market, balancing the very scales he had tampered with on his shoulders, while children threw pebbles and old women spat curses. Others, accused of slander, were made to carry around a clay tablet inscribed with their false words, a burden heavy not in weight but in shame, as the city read aloud the very lies they once tried to hide. And then there were the stranger punishments, whispered about more than written, the ones that hovered between folklore and fact. Stories of a liar made to eat onions until his stomach rebelled, or another forced to stand for hours with honey smeared upon his face, left to the mercy of flies beneath the Babylonian sun. Whether these tales were true or simply warnings told to children, no one could quite say. But in all of them, one theme remained constant: the lie never vanished into the air. It clung, it echoed, it demanded retribution. In the torchlit courts of Babylon, truth had weight. And those who dared twist it soon learned that the city had many inventive ways of setting the scales right again. A courtroom beneath the sun. In Babylon, courts were not quiet chambers tucked away in stone buildings. Justice unfolded in the open air, beneath awnings stretched across wooden beams to shield judges and scribes from the relentless sun. Citizens gathered, squatting on their heels in dusty rows, watching as if the proceedings were theater, and in many ways they were. For in Babylon, every case was a performance of truth and deceit, with the gods themselves imagined as the unseen audience. At the center of these trials sat the judges, stern men in linen robes, their heads shaved smooth, their eyes ringed with kohl to ward off the sun's glare. Before them, clay tablets lay scattered, inscribed with cuneiform rulings that reached back generations. The tablets were heavy, not only in weight but in authority, for they carried the memory of Hammurabi's great code, words pressed into clay with a stylus centuries earlier, words that still bound the living. A young scribe, barely more than a boy, knelt to record each testimony. His reed stylus scratched softly against wet clay, catching every name, every accusation, every shifting detail of the story. The act of writing itself was sacred. Once a lie was etched into clay, it could not be erased without leaving scars. A liar's words, therefore, became visible forever. Take, for instance, the case of Nabudan, a merchant of dried dates. He stood one morning accused by his neighbor of lying about a debt. His neighbor claimed to have lent him 3 shekels of silver, while Nabudan swore he had already repaid it, producing witnesses whose loyalty seemed suspiciously purchased. The crowd leaned forward as the judges conferred, lips tight, eyes scanning the accused with a severity that felt almost divine. The verdict came swiftly: the river. At dawn the next day, the crowd gathered by the Euphrates, the water glowing gold in the rising sun. Priests in white robes led Nabudan to the bank, chanting prayers to Shamash and Ea, Lord of Waters. The merchant trembled, his fine robe traded for a simple loincloth, his hair plastered to his brow with sweat. "May the river judge between truth and falsehood," the high priest declared. And with that, 2 guards shoved him into the current. The crowd gasped as the water swallowed him whole. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the lapping of waves. Then, sputtering, thrashing, Nabudan broke the surface, flailing desperately. The river carried him downstream, but the gods allowed his body to wash ashore, alive, though shivering and humiliated. The judges declared him innocent. The debt was erased. Yet among the onlookers, whispers spread. "The river has spared him," they said, "but who knows whether the gods still watch?" For even acquittal left a mark, a stain of suspicion. In Babylon, surviving the waters proved the gods' mercy, but it did not silence gossip. And so, justice in the city was never truly complete. Lies might be punished, but their echoes lingered, floating like silt in the river long after the trial was done. The theater of humiliation. Not every lie was grand enough to summon the river. For lesser deceits, Babylon had punishments that were less fatal but far more humiliating, punishments designed not only to correct the liar, but to let the city laugh at them, to turn deceit into a spectacle. The marketplace, that noisy stretch where merchants hawked fish, barley, and wool, often doubled as a stage for such performances. Here, the liar was paraded, surrounded by guards who announced his crime as if calling out wares. "This man lied about the weight of his silver," they would shout. "This woman bore false witness against her neighbor." The crowd, hungry for entertainment, needed little encouragement. One punishment involved the very tools of the lie. A merchant who cheated with scales was forced to carry those scales upon his back, day after day, while children mocked him and customers pointed him out with jeers. Sometimes clay tablets inscribed with the false statement were hung around the liar's neck like a collar of shame. He could not hide his lie, it traveled with him, as heavy as guilt itself. There were harsher inventions, too. Some liars were made to stand in the heat of the afternoon, with their mouths stuffed full of reeds, a symbol of words twisted into nonsense. Others had their heads shaved bald, no small humiliation in a society where hair signified dignity, and were led through the streets with ashes scattered over them, their shame visible in every step. But Babylonian justice also had a streak of comedy, as though the gods themselves enjoyed watching liars squirm. One story, preserved in the chatter of later scribes, told of a man accused of exaggerating the number of goats in his herd. As punishment, he was tied to a goat cart and dragged through the city, forced to bleat like a goat at every corner. Whether the tale was fact or fable, it lived on because it made people laugh, and laughter, after all, was its own form of punishment. The philosophy behind such sentences was simple. A lie corrupted not just an individual but the harmony of the community. The punishment, therefore, needed to be seen by all, so that the city itself was cleansed of the falsehood. The liar's shame became a lesson, a story for neighbors to retell over bread and beer in the evening. And so, in Babylon, truth was not only sacred, it was communal. A lie offended the gods, yes, but it also insulted the eyes and ears of neighbors who had trusted in honesty. To restore balance, the liar was offered not privacy, but exposure, their deceit peeled open under the desert sun. For in this ancient city, humiliation was sometimes more feared than death. Rituals of cleansing the lie. The Babylonians believed that a lie was not only a crime, it was a stain, a blemish that clung to the soul like soot on white linen. To let it remain unaddressed was to invite sickness, famine, or the wrath of Shamash, who saw all things from his seat in the heavens. Thus, when a lie had been spoken, it was not enough to punish the liar's body or pride. The untruth itself had to be cleansed, drawn out like poison. In the courtyards of temples, this cleansing took the form of ritual. The accused would be brought before the priests, who stood barefoot upon cool tiles of baked clay, the smell of incense heavy in the air. First came confession. The liar, or the one suspected, was ordered to repeat the lie aloud, word for word, before the assembled crowd. This act alone was believed to draw the shadow out of the heart and make it tangible. To keep silent, or to alter the words, was to risk angering the gods further. Next came the offering. A clay figurine, crudely fashioned to represent the liar, was pressed into his hands. Onto its surface the priests inscribed the cuneiform signs for deceit. With solemnity, the figurine was cast into a brazier, flames devouring the falsehood as the crowd murmured prayers. The burning was not just symbolic, it was thought to carry the lie upward in smoke, where Shamash could see it purified by fire. But sometimes fire was not enough. In certain cases, water was called upon to wash the deceit away. The liar might be sprinkled with water drawn from the Euphrates at dawn, mixed with herbs sacred to Yah, the god of wisdom and the deep. This water was poured over the liar's head while priests chanted incantations, words that sounded more like a lullaby than a curse, rising and falling in rhythm with the drum. The idea was that the water carried the lie away, dissolving it back into the river that sustained life. There were harsher rituals as well, meant for those whose deceit was believed to endanger the whole community. In these cases, the liar's tongue was smeared with bitter herbs, mustard, wormwood, and garlic, so that his very mouth burned with the taste of dishonesty. "Let the tongue that has lied know bitterness," the priests would declare. Some claimed this ritual left a man unable to lie again, as though the gods had branded his tongue with the memory of fire. For the Babylonians, these rituals were not mere theatrics. They were acts of cosmic repair. A lie was like a crack in the wall of a temple, small at first, but if ignored, it could spread until the entire structure collapsed. To mend it was to safeguard the order of the world. And when the ritual was done, when the flames had died or the river water had dried upon the liar's skin, the crowd would disperse. Life resumed, merchants haggling, children chasing each other through the alleys, priests returning to their chants. Yet the memory lingered. The lie had been exposed, punished, cleansed, but the echo of it lived on in the whispers of Babylon. The nobleman's lie. Not all lies were whispered in the marketplace. Some slipped into the royal court itself, where words carried the weight of kingdoms. Babylonian scribes recorded, or perhaps invented, tales of noblemen who thought they could twist truth for their own gain. One such story, told with relish by generations, concerned Belsham, a courtier of the king. Belsham was a man of charm and ambition. His beard was oiled, his robes dyed with indigo, and his tongue sharper than a bronze blade. He had risen quickly in court, not by valor in battle or service in administration, but by words, carefully chosen, slyly offered, designed to flatter and to wound in equal measure. Yet words, in Babylon, were both his ladder and his downfall. The tale begins with land. A fertile plot by the river, thick with reeds and date palms, belonged to a widow named Ninlatu. Her husband had been a soldier, lost in one of the king's endless border skirmishes, and the land was her livelihood. Belsham coveted it. He appeared before the judges, claiming the land had been given to him as a royal favor years before, and that Ninlatu unlawfully occupied it. His witnesses, paid, no doubt, swore to the same story, their oaths sealed with gestures to Shamash. But Ninlatu stood her ground. She spoke with the trembling strength of one who has nothing left to lose. I was wife to Aramirkan, who shed his blood for the king. This land was his, and I, as his widow, am its keeper. Belsham lies. The court grew restless. A widow against a nobleman was no small contest. The judges turned to the tablets of Hammurabi, their edges worn smooth by centuries of use, searching for guidance. The code was clear: false testimony was a crime as grave as theft itself, for it poisoned the stream of justice. At last, the verdict was pronounced. Belsham would face the river ordeal. If he emerged alive, the land was his. If not, his deceit would drown with him. On the day of judgment, the court and half the city crowded the river bank. The Euphrates rolled brown and swift, carrying reeds and driftwood on its back. Belsham's confidence had waned. He walked barefoot, his jewels stripped away, his head bowed as priests intoned their chants. Still, he carried the arrogance of one who believed fortune favored him. The guards shoved him into the current. For a moment, he vanished beneath the foam. Then his head broke the surface, his arms flailing. The crowd surged forward, gasping, pointing. Belsham struggled, dragged by the river's pull, his cries muffled by the roar of water. At last, his body was swallowed downstream, never to be seen again. The judges raised their hands. The gods have spoken, they declared. The land was restored to Ninlatu, her dignity intact. The people of Babylon told the story for years after, savoring its lesson. The higher a man climbed on lies, the harder the river pulled him down. Lessons for small tongues. If lies could bring noblemen to ruin, the Babylonians reasoned, then children had to be taught early that deceit was a dangerous fire. Families, temples, and schools all played their part in shaping little tongues, guiding them toward truth with stories, games, and sometimes gentle fear. In the scribal schools, where boys practiced the wedge-shaped strokes of cuneiform until their fingers ached, the lessons of honesty were woven into their very tablets. A master scribe might dictate a proverb: "He who lies will be caught by Shamash." Over and over, the boys pressed the stylus into wet clay, not only memorizing the words but engraving the warning into muscle memory. Mistakes were met not with harsh beatings, but with pointed corrections, and sometimes the embarrassment of reciting one's flawed tablet aloud before peers. To be laughed at for errors was itself a small rehearsal of shame. At home, mothers told stories that hovered somewhere between myth and bedtime tale. One favorite was of a child who stole figs from the temple storehouse and denied it. When the priests questioned him, the boy swore he was innocent. But that night, the moon, believed to be the eye of the gods, shone so brightly into his sleeping chamber that he could not rest. His eyes burned, his tongue felt heavy, until at last he confessed, and only then did sleep return. The moral was clear: the gods missed nothing, not even the small lies of children. Yet, as in all societies, discipline carried a spectrum. Some fathers pinched their sons' ears when they were caught fibbing, muttering, "May your ears never hear your own falsehood again." Others preferred creative methods. One mother was said to have tied a small clay tablet around her daughter's neck, inscribed with the words, "I lied to my mother." The girl wore it all day, enduring the smirks of her siblings until she swore never to repeat the offense. And then there were the games. Children in Babylon played a version of truth or trick, where one child told a story, and the others had to guess if it was true. If the teller was caught lying, they were made to carry a reed mat on their back, crawling like a donkey while the others jeered. To adult eyes, it was only laughter, but the lesson was there. Lies made you ridiculous, while truth let you stand tall. So from their earliest years, Babylonian children were guided to understand that words carried weight. A false word was never just a sound, it was a stain, a risk, a shadow that followed. And though they might not have grasped the cosmic scale of deceit, they knew enough to fear the laughter of their peers, the pinch of their parents, and the gaze of the gods that never slept. And then there were the games. Children in Babylon played a version of truth or trick, where one child told a story, and the others had to guess if it was true. If the teller was caught lying, they were made to carry a reed mat on their back, crawling like a donkey while the others jeered. To adult eyes, it was only laughter, but the lesson was there. Lies made you ridiculous, while truth let you stand tall. When the gods were asked to judge, when human judgment wavered and the truth lay tangled like reeds in the river, the Babylonians turned their faces upward. It was not enough to rely on witnesses, who might be bribed, or on judges, who might be swayed. Sometimes the gods themselves had to be invited into the court, to pry open the mouth of deceit and let truth spill forth. In the great temple of Shamash, the sun god and patron of justice, priests specialized in the art of divination. When a case grew murky, when a man accused his brother of theft with no witnesses, or when a wife stood accused of secret dealings in the marketplace, the priests were called to consult the divine. The process was both solemn and theatrical. One common method was the examination of the liver. A spotless lamb would be sacrificed, its body laid upon a polished stone slab. The priests cut carefully, their hands steady, their eyes trained for signs. The liver, considered the seat of life, was lifted high, its surface glistening under torchlight. Every blemish, every unusual curve, was read as though it were a letter written by the gods. This mark, a priest might declare, shows deceit. The accused speaks lies. Or, conversely, the organ is pure, the words are true. The crowd held its breath, for the verdict of the gods carried more weight than any man's testimony. There were other oracles too. A bowl of oil poured into water might form patterns interpreted as truth or falsehood. Birds circling above the temple could be taken as omens, their direction and cry shaping the outcome of a case. Even the flicker of a torch in the wind might be read as a sign from Shamash, who saw all things from the heavens. For the accused, these rituals were terrifying. A man might know himself innocent, yet tremble as the priest peered into a lamb's glistening organ, knowing that one unlucky blemish could condemn him. And for the guilty, hope always lingered. Perhaps the gods would overlook their crime, or perhaps the priests would misread the signs. It was, in truth, a gamble played on a cosmic scale. But the Babylonians did not see it as chance. To them, these divinations were the purest justice, the stripping away of human weakness to let divine light shine upon hidden things. The gods could not be bribed, nor deceived, nor flattered. If they declared a man guilty, no protest could change the verdict. Thus, when lies grew too thick for men to untangle, Babylon looked to the heavens. And whether through the curve of a liver, the shimmer of oil, or the cry of a raven, the gods always answered. The murmur of gossip. Not all lies in Babylon were dragged before the courts, or measured by priests with their lamb livers and omens. Many died, or lived, among the people themselves, carried on the breath of gossip. If the law punished lies with ritual and spectacle, gossip punished them with endurance, for once a rumor began to coil through the streets of Babylon, it was almost impossible to silence. The city's marketplaces were alive with this undercurrent. Women balancing baskets of figs whispered about neighbors who cheated in weights. Men sipping beer in shaded taverns traded tales of debtors swearing falsely to their creditors. Even children, sharp-eared and quick to repeat, became little messengers of scandal. A single falsehood, once spoken, could swell into a legend by nightfall. There was a peculiar cruelty to Babylonian gossip. It did not always concern whether a lie was large or small, dangerous or trivial. What mattered was the story it created. A woman accused of lying about her dowry might find the tale retold in 3 different forms by the end of the week. One version claiming she had hidden silver under her mattress, another that she had bewitched her husband, and yet another that she was plotting to leave him altogether. The truth became irrelevant, the entertainment was the point. Yet gossip, for all its pettiness, served as a kind of shadow court. Liars who escaped official judgment often paid the heavier price of social ruin. A merchant who once swindled his customers might never again sell a pod of barley, no matter how loudly he protested his innocence. A craftsman accused of lying about the strength of his bricks could find entire projects cancelled. His reputation burned more thoroughly than any figurine cast into temple fire. The Babylonians even had a word for this persistent echo of lies, sibtu, a curse of rumor that clung to a person like dust on sandals. To live under it was to walk with bowed head, always aware of the murmurs behind one's back. Unlike the river ordeal, or the priestly rites, gossip never ended in a single day. It lingered, spreading slowly, devouring trust grain by grain until a person's name was hollow. And yet, curiously, gossip also served as entertainment. In the cool evenings, when the heat of the sun softened and neighbors gathered outside their mud brick homes, stories of liars became a form of communal theater. Someone would begin, "Did you hear what happened to the baker who watered down his beer?" And soon the whole courtyard would be laughing, clucking, shaking their heads. The liar became a character in a story, a fool whose fate was retold with relish. So it was in Babylon. The law might punish a lie once, with fire, water, or herbs. But gossip punished it forever, weaving it into memory, where it lived long after the liar himself was gone. The oath that bound the tongue. If gossip was the whisper of the streets, then the oath was thunder from the heavens. In Babylon, to swear an oath was not a casual thing. Words alone carried weight, but when a man or woman swore by the gods, those words became chains, binding not only the tongue but the soul. To break them was considered the gravest lie of all, for it did not merely deceive neighbors or judges, it insulted the very powers who held the world together. The ceremony of an oath was deliberate, theatrical, and often terrifying. The accused or the witness would be brought before an image of the god, perhaps a statue of Shamash with rays of light carved into his crown, or the serpent dragon of Marduk, painted in vivid glaze upon a temple wall. Standing there, trembling, the person would press their hand upon a sacred object, a dagger of bronze, a jar of consecrated water, or a tablet inscribed with holy words. The priest would then demand, "Speak truth, and let the gods guard your tongue. Speak falsehood, and let them strike you." What followed was a silence that felt heavier than stone. All eyes watched as the oath-taker spoke, his voice often breaking, his eyes darting as if to catch a glimpse of divine judgment waiting in the shadows. To swear falsely was to risk sickness, famine, even death, not just for oneself, but for one's household. The Babylonians believed the gods punished liars with slow curses, a field that refused to yield barley, a child struck by fever, a well that turned bitter. And so, an oath was rarely taken lightly. Merchants swore by Shamash when sealing contracts. Soldiers swore by Marduk before marching to battle. Even lovers sometimes swore by Ishtar, goddess of passion, when promising fidelity. To break such a vow was to invite divine wrath, which might not strike at once but would linger, stalking the liar until the curse found its mark. Stories circulated of oath-breakers who met grim ends. One tale told of a man who swore he had delivered a caravan's goods in full, though he had stolen half along the way. Within a year, locusts devoured his fields, and his sons fell ill. Another spoke of a woman who swore falsely about her neighbor's dowry. Her tongue, it was whispered, swelled until she could no longer speak, as though the gods themselves had sealed it shut. The people of Babylon needed no further reminder. A lie told under oath was no mere deception, it was blasphemy. And unlike the punishments of judges or gossip, the gods' vengeance could not be escaped. It was patient, relentless, and inevitable. Thus, in the shadow of temples and beneath the gaze of divine statues, truth was not only a civic duty. It was a sacred bond. To speak falsely while swearing by the gods was to gamble with one's very life, and most found the risk too heavy for even the most tempting lie. Proverbs against the liar. If the courts, the temples, and the river were the grand arenas of truth, then the ordinary sayings of the people were its quiet guardians. In Babylon, wisdom was not only carved into laws or recited by priests, it lived in the proverbs whispered from parent to child, scratched onto school tablets, and traded like coins in taverns. And many of these sayings turned, again and again, upon the theme of lies. The scribal schools preserved dozens of such proverbs, etched in neat cuneiform lines. One common phrase read, "The liar builds his house on reeds, the river will take it away." Children copied it again and again, their clumsy strokes firming into wisdom. Another warned, "A false tongue is a broken bow, it cannot strike its mark." These short, sharp images lived in the minds of those who heard them, reminding Babylonians that dishonesty was not just immoral, it was foolish, impractical, doomed to collapse. In households, elders leaned on these proverbs to correct wayward youth. If a boy denied stealing figs, his grandmother might shake her head and mutter, "The liar's ear hears the whip even in silence." If a girl exaggerated her chores, her mother might snap, "A lie is sweet in the mouth but bitter in the belly." Such phrases were not arguments, they were verdicts, heavy with the weight of generations. Even taverns, thick with beer and laughter, echoed with them. A drunkard might boast wildly of the fish he caught in the river, only for a companion to chuckle and reply, "The river knows the liar's hook." Laughter followed, but beneath it, the truth lingered. No boast or falsehood could outlast the watchful gaze of gods, neighbors, or memory. Some proverbs carried a harsher edge. One, repeated with relish, warned, "The liar's son will carry his shame in his sandals." Another claimed, "Better a thief in the night than a liar in the morning." These sayings hinted at a deeper fear, that lies corrupted not just the individual but the family, the community, even the future. To lie was to cast a shadow that stretched beyond one's own life. Yet there was humor too. A favorite saying, carved onto a fragment of tablet, read, "The liar eats onions, his breath betrays him." It was a joke, certainly, but also a reminder: deceit carried its own stench, impossible to conceal for long. In these short lines, the Babylonians captured what their laws and rituals declared in grand form. Lies were fragile, fleeting, dangerous things. And while courts and priests enforced justice, it was these proverbs, easy to recall, quick to repeat, that kept the lesson alive in daily life. For in Babylon, truth was not only guarded by kings and gods. It was spoken in kitchens, taverns, and classrooms, where small phrases shaped the hearts of those who would one day carry the city's name. Lies in the market stalls. The beating heart of Babylon was not its palace, nor even its towering ziggurat, but its market. There, beneath canopies of woven reeds, traders from across the empire gathered, Sumerian farmers with baskets of onions, Assyrian merchants with bolts of dyed cloth, and caravan leaders fresh from the deserts with spices, copper, and lapis lazuli. Amid the clamor of bargaining, the air thick with dust and roasting fish, truth and lies mingled like smoke. For in commerce, the temptation to lie was constant. A merchant might swear his grain was measured honestly, though his thumb pressed heavily on the scale. A cloth seller might claim her dye was the deep indigo of far-off lands, when in truth it was a cheaper blend that would fade in the sun. Even brewers of beer were not free from suspicion. Some were said to water their drink, passing off weak barley mash as strong ale. But Babylon was not without defenses. Inspectors appointed by the king walked the markets, checking scales, testing measures, and ensuring that contracts matched reality. These officials carried staffs of office, their presence a warning that deceit in trade was no private sin, it was a disruption of order itself. After all, Babylon's wealth depended on trust. If traders lied freely, caravans would stop, silver would vanish, and the city's lifeblood would dry up. Still, no inspector could catch every falsehood. And so the marketplace developed its own unwritten system of justice. A merchant caught lying might not face the river, but he could lose his customers. The people had long memories, and once a stall earned the reputation of deceit, its goods spoiled on the shelves no matter how loudly the seller protested. Women whispered warnings to one another as they bought barley. Men steered their donkeys past stalls they no longer trusted. In this way, the market punished its liars with silence and avoidance. Yet sometimes spectacle returned. A seller accused of lying about weights might be dragged before the crowd, his scales broken with a hammer, his goods scattered into the dust. One story told of a fishmonger who swore his catch was fresh, though it stank of yesterday's river. He was made to sit beside his rotting wares until they drew flies and laughter alike, a living lesson in the price of falsehood. And still, the temptation endured. For what was a lie, to a desperate farmer with too little grain to sell? What was exaggeration, to a cloth maker hoping to earn enough for his daughter's dowry? In Babylon, as in all cities, truth and survival often wrestled in the marketplace. The laws of Hammurabi were clear, the punishments sharp, but between the shouting of traders and the jingling of silver, there was always room for one more little lie. Lies within the household. Beyond the courts and markets, lies crept quietly into the mud-brick homes of Babylon. The family was the smallest, most fragile unit of society, and within its walls truth was supposed to be the mortar that held it together. Yet here too shadows gathered. Husbands lied to wives, wives to husbands, children to parents, and each falsehood carried its own peril. Marriage contracts in Babylon were detailed, inscribed in cuneiform on clay tablets, and stored safely with temple scribes. A husband promised silver for his wife's dowry, a wife pledged her loyalty and the keeping of the household. But contracts, however strong in clay, could not bind the tongue. Some husbands strayed, swearing to their wives they were away on business while sneaking into the taverns or into another's arms. Some wives, burdened by scarcity, claimed they had spun more wool or brewed more beer than the jars revealed. When such lies were exposed, the consequences varied. A husband might find himself mocked in public if his deception reached neighbors' ears, for nothing spread faster in Babylon than the scandal of a household dispute. A wife caught in falsehood might face harsher judgment, since her honesty was tied directly to her honor and her family's standing. One tablet records a woman accused of lying about her fertility. Her punishment was exile from her husband's house, her dowry returned in shame. Children, too, were not free from scrutiny. A boy caught sneaking figs from the family storehouse might swear his innocence, only for the truth to reveal itself in sticky fingers and guilty eyes. Mothers often devised small punishments to teach lessons, a pinch of the ear, a day without honey, or the recitation of proverbs about lying tongues. Yet fathers, especially stern ones, sometimes invoke the gods, forcing the child to stand before a household idol of Shamash, swearing not to lie again, lest the sun god himself withhold favor. But not every household lie was punished. Some were softened, excused, even quietly encouraged. A wife might pretend not to notice when her husband returned late, his clothes smelling of beer. A husband might turn a blind eye to the little exaggerations his wife told at market. These were not lies meant to wound but to soothe, to preserve peace where truth might break it. For the Babylonians knew, as people always have, that families survive not only on honesty but on mercy. Still, the weight of words lingered. Even within the walls of a home, the Babylonians believed that Shamash's light reached. A whispered untruth in a courtyard could echo, unseen, into the ears of the gods. And so parents taught their children, again and again, "Do not lie in the house, for the gods see even in the dark." Lies in the halls of power. If lies in the home could fracture a family, lies in the palace could unravel an empire. In Babylon, politics was a theater where words carried armies in their wake. Kings swore oaths before gods, ambassadors carried messages sealed with clay impressions, and treaties bound lands together, or split them apart, with the fragile thread of trust. To lie in such matters was to gamble not only with honor, but with the wrath of gods and men alike. The court scribes recorded alliances in clay, each tablet stamped with royal seals. These treaties always began with solemn invocations. Shamash, Ishtar, Marduk, all called upon to witness the truth of the words. "If you break this oath," one treaty warns, "may your land be swallowed by flood, your children by famine, and your name by forgetting." Such curses were not mere decoration. They were understood as real weapons, for to lie under oath was to invite divine ruin. Yet lies still whispered through palace corridors. A governor might write to the king claiming loyalty, while secretly sending gifts to a rival power. An ambassador might present exaggerated reports of enemy strength, hoping to push his master toward war. Even the kings themselves, despite the grandeur of their seals, sometimes deceived their subjects. A decree might declare a tax temporary, though every farmer knew it would endure for generations. Spies, too, thrived in this world of shadows. Disguised as traders or scribes, they carried false reports across the desert routes. A king might order false rumors to spread in a rival's city, that his allies were betraying him, or that the gods had withdrawn their favor. Such lies were not spoken lightly, for once unleashed, they had a way of tangling truth until no one knew the difference. The consequences could be catastrophic. One clay tablet from Mari, an allied city-state, records the anger of a ruler who discovered Babylon's king had broken an oath of alliance. He wrote furiously to his counterpart, "You swore before Shamash, yet your words were false. Do you think the gods are blind? Even the river knows your deceit." His words reveal not just anger, but genuine fear, that divine punishment for the lie would not fall only on the liar, but on all who touched the treaty. Yet politics demanded risk. Sometimes lies succeeded, delaying war, winning time, or securing trade. Other times they backfired, staining reputations for generations. A Babylonian proverb, often repeated in court, warned, "A king who lies loses not only his crown but his shadow." In this world, deceit could bring a throne closer, or strip it bare. For in the halls of Babylon's power, lies were never small. They were carved into clay, spoken beneath painted ceilings, and carried on the backs of messengers racing through the desert. And whether whispered or shouted, every falsehood trembled beneath the gaze of gods who, it was said, missed nothing. Lies before the gods. If lying in the market risked losing silver, and lying in the palace risked losing crowns, then lying in the temple risked far more, the loss of one's soul. For the Babylonians believed the gods were not only judges of men's deeds but guardians of truth itself. To deceive in sacred space was to shake hands with destruction. The temples were the city's lungs, breathing incense, hymns, and sacrifices. Priests interpreted omens, read the patterns of smoke, and translated the will of gods into clay and word. Yet in a place where men claimed to speak for divinity, the temptation to twist the truth was ever present. A priest might shade his interpretation of an omen to favor a wealthy patron. An oracle might speak words that pleased the king, rather than the ones inscribed in the stars. Babylonian texts preserve warnings against such falsehood. One hymn to Shamash cries, "O sun, you see the lies of the false diviner, you burn his shadow to dust." Another ritual text prays for protection against the words of the lying prophet, who says thus speaks the God, though the God has not spoken. To claim divine speech falsely was the gravest of lies, one that threatened not just a man, but the order of the cosmos itself. Omens, too, carried dangers of deceit. A lunar eclipse might terrify a city, suggesting doom for its king. But what if a priest soothed the people, insisting no such meaning existed, simply to keep the peace, or his position? The Babylonians feared such half-truths, for to misinterpret the heavens was to blind the city to the gods' warnings. Yet they also understood the delicate balance priests walked, for too much truth, spoken without care, could ignite panic. Ordinary worshippers were not exempt. In temple courts, a man might swear falsely by the name of Marduk to avoid paying a debt. A woman might vow an offering she never intended to bring. Such acts were believed to stain not only the liar but the entire city, for the gods' anger was rarely precise. It could fall like a storm upon guilty and innocent alike. To guard against this, rituals of purification were performed. Suspected false prophets might be made to drink sacred water while invoking the gods' names, trusting the divine to strike the liar. Others were forced to swear by Shamash, his blazing light believed to scorch deceit from the tongue. In extreme cases, tablets described liars being cast out of the temple precincts, their names cursed into silence. Yet even here, the Babylonians admitted a shadow of doubt. Could anyone, priest or king, truly claim to know the mind of the gods without error? Was every false word a lie, or sometimes merely human weakness? The line between deceit and mistake blurred, and in that blur the priests themselves walked carefully, hoping their voices carried truth rather than ruin. For in Babylon, lying was never just a human failing. It was a wound in the divine order, a crack in the harmony between earth and heaven. And each false word, however small, risked echoing upward to the thrones of the gods themselves. When law codes and temple warnings were not enough, the Babylonians turned to stories. Their myths and epics were woven with lessons, where gods and heroes alike sometimes spoke falsely, and the consequences of those deceptions echoed across heaven and earth. These tales were more than entertainment. They were reminders that even divine beings could struggle with the snare of a lie. One of the oldest stories whispered along the Euphrates told of Enki, the clever god of wisdom. Enki was known not only for his deep knowledge of the waters but for his tricks. In one tale, he deceives another deity by disguising his words, promising friendship, while secretly plotting to outwit him. The story delighted listeners, for it showed that even gods used cunning, but it also carried a warning. For while Enki's trick succeeded, it sowed discord among the heavens, and the world below trembled with its aftershocks. Another story, told around hearth fires, concerned a spirit who promised a farmer endless grain if he built a shrine in her honor. The farmer agreed eagerly, but when the shrine was complete, the spirit vanished, and the man was left with empty fields. The liar brings hunger, the storytellers would conclude, as children shivered beside their mothers. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though mostly about the search for immortality, carried its share of deceit. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought the bull of heaven, they boasted to the gods afterward, claiming more glory than truth allowed. This arrogance was a form of lying, a swelling of words beyond their rightful measure, and it led to Enkidu's doom. The epic, like so many Babylonian stories, reminded listeners that a false tongue, even if gilded by pride, invited destruction. Even the creation myths were not free of lies. In some versions, Tiamat's allies deceive one another with false promises, whispering loyalty while planning betrayal. These lies twist the order of the cosmos until Marduk rises, armed with truth and storm, to restore balance. In these stories, deceit is not just human, it is cosmic chaos, a force that unravels worlds if left unchecked. But not all myths painted lying as entirely ruinous. Trickster tales, often told with laughter in taverns, showed spirits or minor gods using clever deceptions to outwit monsters or greedy nobles. In these stories, the lie was a tool, a spark of survival in a world too harsh for brute honesty alone. Yet even these tales carried a faint unease, as though to remind the audience that a blade, however sharp, cuts both ways. And so the myths sang their chorus. Lies could charm, could trick, could dazzle for a moment, but they always bore a cost. Sometimes that cost was exile, sometimes death, and sometimes only the faint, bitter taste of regret. In Babylon, the people needed no further proof than the stories they cherished. For the gods themselves had shown it, truth was the sun, steady and eternal. Deceit was only a flicker, burning bright and then vanishing into ash.